Common Council on Tuesday, December 20th. Call to roll. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item C, public comment period, correspondence. At this time, I will recognize those members of the public who have indicated a desire to address the council. Upon recognition by me, persons may address the council, first stating their name and address. The council may act on emergency matters introduced by members of the public. Are there any public comments? Are there any public comments? Are there any public comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to item D. Approval of minutes, December 13th, 2022, regular meeting, December 13th, 2022, closed session. I have a motion by Alderman Paschal, second by Alderman Varsho. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Motion passes, all ayes. Thank you. Item E, staff updates. Pete Fletty.
Thank you. We're in the midst of holiday season and heating season, obviously, so I just wanted to pass this along to everybody here and all those listening. I did issue a press release on December 14th regarding fatal fires in Wisconsin. I'm just going to read that really quickly. On December 9th, 2022, Wisconsin has experienced 2 fatal house fires that have now claimed 5 lives. The Watertown Fire Department responded to a fire at 12:30 a.m. for a fire that claimed the lives of 3 children. The La Crosse Fire Department responded to a fire at 11:52 p.m. that claimed 1 life, and a second victim from that fire subsequently succumbing to their injuries a few days later. The number of civilian home fire fatalities in Wisconsin for 2022 is now up to 51. There were only 40 civilian fire home deaths in Wisconsin in 2021, which was down from 52 in 2020. This is part of a slowly growing upward trend of civilian home fire deaths across the nation. The Marshfield Fire and Rescue Department encourages Wisconsin residents to practice fire safety in their homes, and the MFRD recommends the following. Install smoke alarms inside and outside each sleeping area and on every level of your home. Test your smoke alarms monthly. Sleep with bedroom doors closed to prevent the spread of smoke and fire. Stay in the kitchen when cooking or baking. According to the National Fire Protection Association, cooking is the #1 cause of home fires. And also, please develop and practice an escape plan. Without a home fire sprinkler system, home fires can become deadly in as little as 2 minutes. Follow the safety tips listed above will help limit the danger of a home fire, as well as give you time to escape a burning home. At this point in time, the Wisconsin Fire Service is in crisis mode to prevent any further fire deaths. Please assist us in our quest to keep more of our family members, friends, and neighbors from dying in home fires. I'd also like to quickly point out too that every year we run a campaign in Wood County called Keep the Wreath Green. This runs from Thanksgiving until the new year. As of 12/11 of 2022, we only had 1 red bulb on the wreath, which signifies a fire in Wood County. As of today, we have 8 bulbs. So from 12/11 until now, we've added 7 bulbs on that wreath. So just as, like I said, we're in the holiday season, home heating season. Please be safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Fletty. Any other staff updates? If not, mayor's comments. Landon Kramer, Police Department, 15 years. Congratulations, Landon. Dwayne Wanta, Street Department, 30 years. Congratulations, Dwayne Wanta. I'd like to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Moving on to item G, council comments. Alderman Paschal.
Thank you. I just want to take a minute to recognize the city staff that did an outstanding job with the storm this past week. The emergency services, the street department, and especially the utility department that has taken care of lots of down trees, down power lines, I think we can recognize the need for all of these services in our community. Thank you.
Moving on to item H, reports from commissions, boards, and committees. Seeing none, moving on to item I, consent agendas, meeting minutes and reports. Minutes not in the packet will be read into the record now at the meeting. Our first will be by Dan, Board of Public Works.
Thank you. That meeting was held last night and called to order in these council chambers at 5:30 PM. Present were Alderman Paschal, O'Reilly, Fire, and Marshall, as well as Mayor T. Strake and several city staff members. There was a motion by Fire, second by O'Reilly, to recommend approval of the minutes of the December 5th Board of Public Works meeting. That motion carried. Street Superintendent Hawley gave a report on the winter storm event that Alderman Paschal just mentioned and the ongoing cleanup efforts that are still taking place. There's a motion by Paschal, second by Fire, to recommend approval of the contract amendment with Waste Management, eliminating curbside collection of yard waste, brush and branches, Christmas trees, and bulky items effective January 1, 2023. That motion carried. There's a motion by Fire, second by Marshall, to recommend approval of a request for planning services for the comprehensive outdoor recreation plan update and authorize solicitation of proposals. That motion carried. There's a motion by Marshall, second by O'Reilly, to recommend approval of a request for proposals and an agreement for Vanda Hay Waters concession stand services and authorize solicitation of those proposals. That motion carried. There's a motion by Fire, second by Marshall, to recommend approval of the quotation of Earth Inc. of Arpin, Wisconsin for the 2023 crushing and stockpiling of asphalt and concrete salvage materials and authorize execution of an agreement. That motion carried. There's a motion by Marshall, second by O'Reilly, to recommend that the first Board of Public Works meeting of January be held on Tuesday, January 3rd at 6 PM or immediately following the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee meeting that evening, and that motion carried. Finally, there being no further business, the meeting was adjourned at 5:45 PM.
Thank you, Dan. Next, Judiciary and Licensing, Jessica.
The Judiciary and Licensing Committee meeting was called to order by Alderperson Paschal at 5 PM in the council chambers of City Hall on Tuesday, December 20th. Alderpersons Spiros, Paschal, and Wagner were present. Also present were city staff and the mayor. There was a motion by Wagner and a second by Spiros to approve the minutes of the December 6th meeting. That motion carried. There is a motion by Spiros and a second by Wagner to approve with unanimous consent the following consent agenda items. The application for a secondhand article dealer license from Altercom Wireless, What Goes Around Comes Around, and Benjamin's Bargains and Beyond. An application for secondhand jewelry license from Christensen Jewelers. An application for secondhand jewelry, secondhand article dealer license from Silent Crow Antiques, and an application for an auto salvage dealer license from Asylum Scrap Services. That motion carried. There were no future agenda items. Being no further business, Alderperson Paschal adjourned the meeting at 5:02 PM.
Thank you, Jessica. And moving on to Finance, Budget, and Personnel, Jessica.
The Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee was called to order by Chairperson Witzel at 5:15 PM in the council chambers on Tuesday, December 20th. Present were Alderpersons Witzel, Tompkins, Wagner, Spiros, and Hendler. Also present were Mayor T. Strake, Alderpersons Paschal and Fisher, and many city staff. There were no citizen comments. There is a motion by Wagner and a second by Tompkins to approve the items on the consent agenda, including the minutes of the December 6th, 2022 meeting, the bills and the payroll, and the report of personnel actions. No items were removed from the consent agenda. Motion by Hendler, second by Tompkins, to recommend council approval of budget resolutions number 13-2022 and budget resolution number 1-2023 for mechanical repair work on engine number 2. Motion by Hendler, second by Wagner, to recommend council approval to change part-time adult services position at the library to full-time. That motion carried. Motion by Tompkins, second by Hendler, to recommend council approval to refill vacant payroll, accounts payable technician position and any subsequent vacancies that may be created. That motion carried. Motion by Wagner, second by Tompkins, to recommend council approval of resolution number 2022-50, continuing appropriations to 2023. That motion carried. Motion by Wagner, second by Hendler, to recommend council approval to extend the city's current agreement with SEH Incorporated for planning services through March 31st, 2023. That motion carried. Motion by Tompkins, second by Wagner, to recommend council approval of policy number 3.8003A, wage scale increase for new employees. That motion carried. Motion by Tompkins, second by Wagner to recommend council approval of 2023 partnership agreement for operation of the Marshfield Jobs Center. That motion carried. There were no future agenda items, and being no further business, Chairperson Witzel adjourned the meeting at 5:42 p.m.
Thank you, Jessica. Motion to accept? Actually, motion by Alderman Tompkins, second by Alderman Varsho. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Action on moved items, there are none, so we'll go on to item K. Request to approve both budget resolution number 13-2022 and budget resolution number 01-2023 related to mechanical repair work on engine number 2, presented by Everett Mueller, Deputy Chief of Fire Prevention.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to present the problems we are experiencing with engine 2. Each year, every apparatus with a pump has a pump test conducted on it per an FP 1911, standard for the inspection, maintenance, testing of emergency vehicles. The pump test puts the pump under maximum pressure and load to ensure the pump is capable of pumping at an emergency. It must be completed by a certified third-party vendor. Our third-party vendor is Red Power Diesel. During the 2022 pump testing, a major problem was found with the pump transmission. The pump test found that there was a bad bearing in the pump transmission. That also led to other problems with the gears. The pump transmission and the pump are considered the center section and need to be physically removed from the apparatus in order to get to the pump transmission, as they are on a single shaft that extends through both units. We've accrued costs in the amount of $8,836.90 for the work that has been completed to diagnose the problem. This was an extensive troubleshooting. They had to actually go in and access it, and we had them stop work at that point because we didn't want to accrue further costs. There are 3 different options available, which are outlined in your packets. The best option, in my opinion, is to replace the center section, which is the pump and pump transmission. This repair would require a 14-week lead time. This would include a 6-year warranty for the pump and pump transmission. It is a fixed cost, whereas each of the other options could accrue additional costs with a 1-year warranty or no warranty at all. Engine 2 has 10 years of service life left at the department, and 6 of those years could be covered by an extensive warranty alleviating repair costs over those years. The department is requesting approval of Budget Resolution 13-2022 for the amount of $8,837, which are the current charges with Red Power Diesel, and Budget Resolution 01-2023 for the amount of $45,160, which is option 3, replacement of pump and pump transmission. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. We have a motion by Alderman Tompkins, second by Alderman Fire. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
That motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Request to appoint a team to review the city's organizational chart and to study possible restructuring opportunities, presented by Steve Bark, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. Earlier back in the fall, Councilmember Fisher had raised the issue of looking at our org chart to see if there's any possible opportunities for us to, maybe look at restructuring. He didn't get very detailed about what that might look like, but it was obvious from our conversation that the org chart hadn't been looked at in some time. So anyway, we had the budget process and things to work through, but I think we're ready to move forward now. We also have the ongoing issue with the Development Services Department, as you know, and there's been conversation building a little bit about the possibility of looking at restructuring that department as we've been unable to fill certain positions. Maybe look at a different model for, getting something operational in there to be effective at what that department has to do. So with that in mind, I'm suggesting that we look at creating an 8-member team comprised half council, half staff to get together. I think their first charge ought to be, right after the first of the year, to look at the Development Services Department and to look at the opportunities there, have some information pulled together. We can look at other cities and figure out where we want to take this to try and get back to a more efficient operation there. And then right behind that, right on the heels of it, looking at the full org chart, which you have in the packet tonight, and look at some of the other things. In other words, does it look to be appropriate? How spread are certain department heads or me or others in terms of their scope of influence and responsibility? Do things appear to be, in the right place for what you would expect and for most efficiency and effectiveness? So with that in mind, I would recommend council appointment of the organizational chart review team. Again, my recommendation, although you can choose to veer from this, would be an 8-member group comprised of the mayor, council president, 2 council members, and then 4 city staff members, to definitely include the HR director and myself, and 2 other staff members yet to be determined. And that's what I would be suggesting.
Motion by Alderman Tompkins, second by Alderman Wagner. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Alderman Whitzel.
Just for clarification, are you agreeing with his recommendation for the 4 and 4 in your motion?
Yes.
And do you have an opinion on who the 2 other elected officials would be? Or are we going to do that as a separate item?
I think we're at the moment going to vote on forming the committee, but if
Sure.
you think we should amend as
That's
to-
fine. We'll do it step by step.
Okay, if I can jump in for a second, my memo, and I didn't read it from my memo, did suggest that 1 member would be the finance, budget, and personnel chairperson or their designee. The other, the Board of Public Works chairperson or his or her designee. But again, that's totally up to this body.
So I guess I want to clarify now, Alderperson Tompkins, is that your motion for, as Steve had in the recommendation in the packet? Or are you simply making a motion to form the committee?
That's a very good question. I was just going to have a motion that we form a committee, and the recommendations are fine with me, but if that's not fine with people, I would say amend the motion then.
Any other discussion? I do not.
So no amendment, you're requesting to speak. So if we can just clarify again.
Okay, I would agree with Pat that I am making a motion that we form a committee as recommended by Mr. Barg, that would have on the committee the head of Board of Public Works, the head of the Finance, Personnel, Budget and Personnel Committee.
Or their designees.
Or their designees. Was there other, it was the
And then
mayor
the mayor, the council
and the
president.
council president.
Right.
And then there was staff
yes,
that was
yes.
already, so that's my motion, that we would go with that recommendation.
And still second by Wagner? Now, any other discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Discuss appointing committee to
Thank you.
review proposed ordinance number 1485 and to review the structure of the Utilities Commission presented by Adam Fisher, Alderperson, District Number 7.
Thank you. I'm not used to presenting things, so, but I brought this up at the last meeting because there was a lot of discussion about both the ordinance and the overall structure of the Utility Commission. So after a lot of thought, and my initial thought was, I think we need a committee to explore both. After thinking about this for a week, I really began to look at what I think I heard at the last meeting, and maybe also things that I've seen from the last year and a half. I don't even know what to call myself now, but as maybe an observer of the Marshfield Utility Commission meetings. But what I really heard was one thing was a lot of confusion. I heard people confused about the role of council members at those meetings, confused about how the municipal utility operates. And I also really began to hear a lot of people wanting to better understand the nuances of the finances before we approved an ordinance. And so I think to do our due diligence, we shouldn't rush into this, but we should take a holistic look at the overall utility and the commission. And so part of what I've been feeling over the last week is let's zoom out and look at the greater issue. I don't want to call it an issue, but the greater organization, which is the Marshfield Utilities. And let's understand the structure. And through that, let's better try to understand how they operate so we can understand the nuances of the ordinance and the fiscal controls that they have. One of the observations I did hear at the last meeting was, and I don't want to put words in people's mouth, but just a sense that council members go to these meetings and don't really feel that they are involved in the operation or really have a place to be heard. And now 18 months later, after sitting through those meetings, I can understand why people feel that way because it is a very awkward position for, I think, a council member to be in, to attend a meeting where they really have no governing authority. They are there to just listen. And on occasion, to his credit, the chair will ask for council members' inputs. But that's an awkward position. Also, the commission is made up of 5 members who are unelected. They are appointed by us. One thing that I have noticed over the last 18 months is, and this probably stems from the building, which I don't want to get into that issue, but the building obviously created some pushback from some citizens. Some citizens believed it was a good idea. Some believed it was a bad idea. And I hear from constituents when they're upset about it, what can be done? And my answer is always the same: nothing, other than I can vote to remove a commission member once every 5 years. Other than that, I really have no authority or influence over the day-to-day operations. Now, that may be good and that may be bad. I'm not here today to decide if that's good or bad, but I think what we do need to do is, as a governing body, I feel strongly we need to create a committee to look at this issue and go, is this the perfect structure to have 5 members that are unelected to govern the utility very independently from the council? The second structure, as our corporation council mentioned, we can appoint, by state statute, we can appoint members from the council, unlike other commissions. And I want to make that very clear. The state statutes don't allow, for instance, the Fire and Police Commission to have common council members on it. Based on what we're being told from our legal counsel, this would allow, state statute would allow council members to be voting members. So I think that's another obvious thing we need to look at. Is that a good form moving forward to have council members involved? Or third, do you disband the utility commission? Which again, I asked that question because I wanted to know the answer, because I wanted to know what all the options were. Again, nothing's good, nothing's bad right now, but let's just look at every option. And the third option is to disband the utility commission altogether and have the utility, the Marshfield utility, report directly to either the Board of Public Works or to another committee of the Common Council. As I look at this and as I sit through the meetings, I'm not sure if we have the best form of oversight. So I think we need to do our due diligence and first answer the question, what kind of oversight do we want of our municipal utility? And then from there, look at this ordinance and begin during that time period, while we look at the bigger issue of the structure. I think that gives staff, I would like to think that will give our finance staff and utility staff time to communicate, have conversations. And then once we come to that conclusion, do we want to change anything or not change anything? We can then have the committee begin to look at the overall ordinance and how to implement that. Because I do think it's a well-written ordinance. And so I think we need to look at how do we implement that here at the city. Now, I will say this, my personal view on a lot of this is I think that a lot of this conversation started with the ordinance. And I think, and I said this last week, I think the crux of the disagreement is on the fiscal control of the money. And I probably didn't communicate this well last week, but at the end of the day, I think the general manager of the utility said they have a policy that states that there's 300 days where they have to have, and I'm going to just use the word reserves, available. Whether there's a commission or not, if there truly is a policy, which I assume there is, an official policy voted on by the utility commission at some point, that policy will stay the same unless the council overturns it or some future committee overturns it. So really the operation should not change. It's the question of the oversight. I think the other disagreement we maybe are having is on the definition of profit. Again, these are my words, but I think the utility is trying to claim that they have reserves, not profit. They have money in reserves based on their policy. And to me, that I can understand why they have that terminology, because if you have reserves, that allows you to raise the rates because it shows that you do not have profit. The moment you move it from an accounting standpoint to not have it be reserves and now profit, they're probably having to decrease their rates or at least consider it. At the end of the day, though, they're sitting on millions of dollars, whether we call it reserves or not, whether the policy is there or not. If you had a personal savings account of 20, 30 some $million, most people are going to look at that and go, you have a profit. I understand why they're using that terminology, but at the end of the day, they are sitting on this money. Now, again, that's my personal opinion. I'm sure they disagree with me, but at the end of the day, they do have this money. They do have these policies. We need to get down to the crux of the issues. So what is the structure we want to have overseeing the Marshfield utility? Two, what we need to begin to look at this ordinance and really begin to look at the differences of opinion and how we're going to define this moving forward. So I would like to see a committee formed. I'd like to see 2 members of the Board of Public Works, 2 members of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee come together in a separate committee with both utility staff and city staff being liaisons to this and helping really begin to have an evolving conversation about this.
So are you making a motion, Adam?
I will make a motion, yes.
Any seconds to the motion? Motion by Alderman, second by Alderman O'Reilly. Alderman Witzel?
Thank you. I think the very first thing that needs to be done by any committee that's formed is to look at the existing ordinance and make sure it's being followed. There's certain phrases in the current ordinance that I think I view one way, and I think staff maybe view another way. An example here Department expenditures shall be audited monthly by the commission, and when approved, a voucher schedule shall be prepared and certified to the city clerk by the president and secretary. The claims listed therein have been authorized for payment. There shall be further certifications on the schedule whether or not funds are available for payment of the claims as listed. Order checks shall then be prepared by the utility and entered upon the books of the utility, after which they shall be signed by the utility manager and transmitted to the city clerk and the finance director for their signatures as provided by Wisconsin statute 66.0607 sub 4. And it goes on to say the mayor's signature shall not be necessary to validate such order checks. I don't know that we're necessarily even following everything that's in the current ordinance, and I would like to make sure that the committee first reviews what's there, make sure that we're following it before we look at any other changes, but then take the full approach of what is the best structure for the city moving forward.
Any other discussion? Absolutely.
I just want to make sure I have your motion correct. I have that you are making a motion to appoint a committee comprised of 2 members of the Board of Public Works, 2 members of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee, utility staff, and city staff to review the proposed ordinance and to review the structure of the Marshfield Utilities Commission.
If I may, Madam Mayor, respond to that?
Yes.
All right. Yes, that is my motion. The staff are support, so they're not, I'm not counting them as voting members, but support to the committee. So.
Alderman Riley, you still okay seconding the motion? Any other discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yeah.
Motion carries. Staff report discussion on a possible referendum for public safety funding introduced by Steve Barg, City Administrator, presented by Pete Fletty, Fire Chief.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, you recall going back to during the budget process, we had a lot of conversation about the EMS fund and, you know, where things stand. We talked a lot about the firefighter paramedics that have not been replaced since they left and how we're down 3 from where we were in the past. And at that time, we talked about referendums as well. And there have been a lot of referendums conducted across Wisconsin. In fact, 20 on November 8th were conducted for public safety purposes. The vast majority for EMS, fire, and police, but there were some things that were maybe public safety related that got thrown in there as well. Anyway, the council definitely showed interest in pursuing the possibility of a referendum to fund the city's needs in the area of fire and EMS. So we began looking at this with the idea that we would come back to you soon. Now, as the city clerk, as we reported before, the goal really is if we're going to do something for the spring election on April 4th, we really need to get this wrapped up soon. The target being the meeting on Tuesday, January 10th, which will be the next meeting after this one, unless there's a special meeting called. So what we're talking about today is a recommendation and a report given to you by the Fire and Police Commission with Pete Fletty, the fire chief, and Jody Goering, the police chief, supportive. I want to touch a little bit on how we got to this point, and then we'll have Mike Myers, I think the Fire and Police Commission member, is actually going to speak. Pete Fletty, the fire chief, will talk to fill in the gaps or to answer any questions that might be appropriate for him. But I've always anticipated that there would be 2 or 3 options for the council to consider, kind of a stepladder type of model. And I did meet with staff. I met with, I think it was Steve and Pete, probably Everett as well, finance staff, Jennifer and Jordan, and looked at that idea of doing it. But when we sent it over to the Fire and Police Commission, it became apparent in those meetings, and I was actually at, I think, one of the meetings, and maybe you saw the other one online, that between the police and fire chiefs and the commission, that they really have the heartbeat of the needs of those departments much more known and in line than I do. So they discussed it at length, and they've come up with a recommendation that Mr. Myers is going to give to you, and it's going to include, I think, a primary choice and a secondary option. They'll walk through it, and again, Pete Fletty is there to answer questions as well. Mike?
Good evening, everybody. Merry Christmas. We have had several discussions on this. Steve has been involved with it, like he said. But the fire chief and police chief both and their staff have put together a very informative paper to outline what the options were that we considered as a commission. The commission put a lot of discussion into it before we came to a conclusion, and I think Chief Fletty will summarize that in his presentation. We're all looking out for what's best for the community. What this referendum does, and the positive point about this referendum is that it's not necessarily the commission making any decisions. It's not the city council making any decisions. It's the taxpayers who are involved, or who actually have to pay for whatever the results of this referendum will be. It'll be on our shoulders, the council, the commission, city staff, and the fire and police departments to educate the public as to where we are in service times, service quality, the cost of doing that, and then help have the citizens of Marshfield decide on what level of service they would be willing to pay for. So the only thing I stress is, it's looked upon, referendums are looked upon in different ways, but this is an opportunity where the city council and the commission can get together, present it to the public, and see what the public has to say about it. And nobody's out anything if one decision or another is made, but we have to go in with a combined effort, holding hands, singing Kumbaya, whatever you want to do. But we need to go out to the public, present what we have, the information that you're going to hear, and then let the public make the decision. So I encourage you to get behind the idea of the referendum. It's worked in other communities. It's a tool that other communities are using because they're in the same boat that we are. And I'm encouraged by the fact that we could possibly get our staff up to speed with the needs of both the police and the fire department. So I welcome both the chiefs to make a presentation, and you're encouraged to ask them any questions if you have anything.
Thank you, Commissioner Myers.
Yeah, I'll just, if you don't mind, start out with the recommendation from the Police and Fire Commission at the last meeting. So there was a motion by Keough, a second by Steingraber to approve the following options and recommend approval. The first option was 9 firefighters and turnout gear for each of the 9 firefighters, 1 police officer and uniform and equipment for that officer, 1 record specialist for the police department, and 1 admin assistant share between both fire and police departments. Option number 2 that the commission came up with was 6 firefighters and turnout gear for each of the 6 firefighters, 1 police officer, plus uniform and equipment for that officer, 1 record specialist for the police department, 1 admin assistant share between both police and fire departments, with an additional 3 firefighters 1 or 2 years out in 2025 and 2026. That motion carried with all ayes. With that, I'm just going to speak to fire department needs. Chief Gurink is going to speak to police department needs. So what I did for the Police and Fire Commission, I know we're limited on time, so I'll try to keep this brief, but offered them 3 options. 1 was to fund 3 personnel plus turnout gear. That would have gotten us back up to the 3 firefighters that we lost. I'm going to be honest with you, when I was appointed fire chief, I was already looking at hiring additional staff as our staff was taxed already. In your packet, you should have some graphs in there that indicate our call volume is spiking. It's not just Marshfield, it's not just transfers, it's 911 calls, it's everything right now. And this is happening across the state. So I feel that 3 personnel going to referendum with 3 personnel, would be short-sighted. I think we want to look to the future. We don't want to keep having to go back to the public for referendum after referendum. So the 2 options that I was really looking at were 6 personnel plus turnout gear. 6 personnel would actually put us up to where Rapids is, which is a comparable community with comparable number of calls. They also offer EMS and firefighting and pretty much the same operations we do as far as confined space and everything else. That does get us closer to NFPA 1710 standards. In your packet is NFPA 1710 sheet that you can follow along with. So for a structure fire, just a single family home, 14 firefighters are needed if you're not deploying an aerial device. 15 firefighters are needed if you are deploying an aerial device. As a side note, Stevens Point currently has 13 personnel per shift with 43 sworn. Wausau Fire Department has 18 firefighters, paramedics per shift with 65 sworn personnel. So that just gives you a point of reference. Also, what 6 personnel will do for us is help limit our overtime. It'll give us another ambulance, I guess 2 personnel per shift, right? So that would give us another ambulance ready for service. It moves, like I said, moves us closer to NFPA 1710 standards. And again, reduces overtime. At 9 personnel, came up with this option, really looking towards the future. Also would serve our current needs. And this actually does put us at NFPA 1710 standards, which was a big deal. Also, as second point of reference for NFPA 1710 standards, there are staffing apparatus or staffing recommendations for apparatus. This would put us at 4 out full engines. So we'd have 2 full engines with 4 people on each engine, a full truck company, and an ambulance with 2 personnel responding to a fire at maximum staffing. Meeting NFPA 1710 standards also helps us with our ISO ratings. So if we're able to meet those ratings, that helps insurance rates amongst homeowners and businesses across the city. So that would hopefully create a cost savings for people. We do have some inquiries out to different insurance places to see how much that would make a difference in your rate or your premium. We haven't heard back from those people yet, but I will get you those numbers as soon as I do receive those. Also, this would drastically reduce overtime by raising our minimum staffing levels. Would also allow us to take more interfacility transfers and intercepts, which would increase revenue. And also it's going to reduce the risk of burnout and fatigue by spreading the call volume out amongst personnel. So those are the reasons for the 9 personnel. Like I said, the PFC at their meeting, that was a recommendation, as well as the part-time shared admin assistant position between police and fire. So I'll let Chief Goering speak to the PD's needs.
Okay, the police department that I inherited was in a little bit different situation with the fire department that Chief Floody inherited. I feel that we were appropriately staffed. Our department has 40 sworn officers, which seems like a lot, but we've got we've got some other issues that some area departments don't have as far as geographical. We're an island community. So if you look at our ability to get backup, we can't draw on neighboring communities that have police officers like you would see in, say, the Wausau area, that has several officers very close by that can respond. That offsets their staffing. For us to get backup, Wood County is usually able to have 2 people on the north end. Marathon County is taxed with the size of their department already. Clark County is just a little bit away, so we have to be pretty much self-sufficient. That being said, there isn't really anything that I'm aware of in the policing field that says how many police officers a city should have. Like the fire department has some pretty hard data on that, but there is a goal. There's a window of 2 to 2.5 per thousand in your population. We're running right around 2.1 to 2.2 right now at full staff. Keep in mind our population increases dramatically during the day with the area businesses, to include the clinic or the area shopping centers that we have that aren't close or to other jurisdictions nearby. And also we, at nighttime, we do have a little bit of influx from nightlife that isn't available in the area communities around us. So we have a unique situation to other departments in the area. We I have a history of performing pretty well, and we've got a safe community, and we've gotten that by having this sort of, the department structured the way that it is. With the proposed budget cuts, obviously, it would be very, very hard to keep those standards due to the fact that our operating budgets is very tight. And so the logical reason is to look at staffing. With that, we proposed that we would have one officer, which would bring us up to the 40. And then our record specialists, we have one that's retiring. There's only 3 folks up front that runs our records department. There's a lot of time restraints in our business. So in order to prosecute somebody, we have to have our reports done in a timely manner because they're incarcerated and have to appear in front of the judge. So that is a draw on our staff to get those reports done in time. Our record staff is taxed. With 3, they do struggle to keep up. So with an additional half to share with the fire department would bring us up to better serve the needs of the community in that way. There's some officer safety risks with our record specialists as well, because if there is someone who may be prone or acted in an unsafe manner towards officers, we can get that entered in our system. So other officers in our county would realize that that happened if they were to meet with that individual in the near future. So we do have a need to have the staff that we've had coming into this. And the referendum would help us get that staffing level back up. With that, Pete and I would open this up to any questions or help clarify. It is a complex situation. It's hard to explain a business in a few minutes. But if you have any questions, we'd certainly address that.
Alderman Whitzel?
I won't be shy. I'll kick this off. Just to clarify, what you're asking for, Chief Goering, is just to make your department right the way it had been prior to the budget cuts.
That's exactly right.
Okay. And Chief Floody, what you're looking at is at the bare minimum, making it right before the cuts, but hopefully better sizing it for the call volume.
Correct, yes.
And I think it's important for the public to realize that, again, and I've said this before, it's not because of mismanagement of funds, it's because of the nature of healthcare, and ambulance transports are a part of healthcare. And so when a bill is sent out, people complain about their premiums for healthcare being high, but what they don't realize, or I don't think what they don't necessarily think about regularly, is that part of the reason why their healthcare is high is because there are those Medicare, Medicaid that aren't paid fully, and there are those underinsured or uninsured. And so, like it or not, as a society, those that can pay a bit more so that the system can continue to work. And that's, I think, what we're looking at here. Again, not a mismanagement of funds, but the way that structure is in terms of Medicare, Medicaid, and uncollectible claims. What I'm not seeing from any of this, at least that I could find, was what we're looking at with the different options in terms of a total package amount. I saw various line items that said this is how much per, but I'm wondering about a total package amount. And then I'm also wondering about what kind of an impact this would have, because this would be collected as a part of a property tax. So what kind of an impact are we looking at to a mill rate, to a property tax bill on the different options that were proposed? Thank you.
Yes, I can answer a little bit of that. We did some, and I don't think this is fully tweaked, but some really close math. We'd be looking at 85 cents per thousand, or 85.5 cents per thousand, I'm sorry. So what that would mean for a taxpayer owning a $100,000 home would be $85.50 per year. That would be at the that would be at the option number 1 that PFC recommended. And that's, like I said, that's roughly what it would cost. Does that answer your question?
If I may. So that is with 9 firefighters and the officer and the shared, and it's less than $100 a year per house, or per $100,000 house?
Correct. That'd be about $85.50 per year is what I came up with. Jennifer's nodding her head. That's a good sign.
Thanks. That answers my question.
Alderman Wagner?
Thank you. You said something about, that's got me a little confused, and I think the fly in the ointment for us is that we are joint paramedic and firefighter. And what's happening, you mentioned that with a certain option that we chose, we could respond with 2 engines with manned by 4 people each, and then 1 ambulance crew, and what else was there in that?
Full truck company. So our aerial apparatus or truck one.
Okay.
So each apparatus responding to a scene would have 4, which is NFPA standard.
And how many people would that be on that shift?
That would be a 13-person shift a 14-person shift with 9.
And that's where the fly is in the ointment, in that the way the ambulance calls have proceeded, you're never going to have 14 people in that station.
Correct.
I mean, that's what bothers me. How do we assure that we're putting the maximum firepower, the manning to fight a fire, when we know that as long as we maintain an ambulance service, that we're never going to have that number of people available?
Right. That was my point. At maximum staffing, we'd be able to hit NFPA 1710 standards. So, like you said, even with a person off on vacation, we'd be under that, but it gets us at least closer to those levels.
So, under that standard, we hear a lot about the firefighting part of it, but how do they account for parallel ambulance calls, especially when we're running sometimes all 4 ambulances out at one time? How do we account for that? Is there a standard to tell us how many ambulances we should have if we're going to be doing that per our population?
Right. The NFPA 1710 isn't going to tackle that. Like I said, it gets us closer to the NFPA 1710 standards. However, the way we operate and the way we're able to operate underneath that level and the way we've done it in the history of our department is we're all cross-trained. So there isn't a specific truck company where their only operation is ventilation, where the engine is only operation is to, extend hose lines and jump in, go into the fire. We are all cross-trained. We all do multiple jobs when we respond to a scene. So it's not like New York City where everybody has their own thing, and when they're done with their thing, they go home before the fire's even out, such as a ventilation crew. We are all cross-trained, we all stay on scene and are doing multiple jobs at the beginning of that fire. I don't know how else to explain that besides you might be jumping off your engine, pulling out a ventilation, a positive pressure fan. Your next thing is you're pulling a hose line. We've done this our entire careers. This is how we teach it in a smaller community. And this is how we get it done. So yes, it gets us closer to NFPA 1710 standards, which is a good thing. It helps us with our ISO ratings. But
it doesn't guarantee that we're actually going to have that manpower.
We'll not, as a city our size, we'll never be able to guarantee that, I don't think. Especially when and this is just for a single family structure fire. When you move up to a garden style apartment building, you need 29 firefighters. We're not asking for that. We're just trying to get closer to NFPA 1710 standards for a single family home.
I'm still worried about that. I'm still, it seems like almost a bottomless pit of need.
We also, as Chief Goering pointed out, we also have mutual aid abilities. If a fire does get larger, to call in, Hewitt Area Fire Department. However, that's becoming less and less reliable at this point as volunteer departments, they're failing due to limited staff.
There was a fire at a major employer in Pittsville just last week. Were we called in on that? I saw box calls all over the place, but were we involved in that at all?
We were not. We were far enough down on the box alarm where we were not called in on that. That was Pittsville's fire, so they called in Vesper's aerial apparatus, which probably would have been what we would have sent down there. Or an ambulance, one of those two.
Thank you.
Alderman Tompkins?
I'm just wondering if 9 people are, how many would that add to your shifts if you had 9 extra people?
3 per shift.
3 per shift. And would that be a problem at all with sleeping arrangements or rooms or anything like that?
No, we can make it work.
Alderman O'Reilly?
Thank you. My question kind of runs to the trending with all these additional calls. Has this been an ongoing even curve, or are we seeing a huge influx, and do we have anything we attribute that to? Is it just the aging population, or?
It's mainly the aging population. We did add X number of calls. I don't remember how many exactly it is. I'd have to refer back to the data, but when we took on the intercepts and interfacility agreement, we of course added calls to our call volume. If you look at this graph in your packet, this is just 911s alone. And you can see that's been a steady increase since 2000. And you're right, it's the aging population and it's the main reason for our increased call volume.
Any other questions, discussions? Alderman Spiros?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I caught that the cost of the package, as Alderman Whistle referred to it, was $85.50 per $100,000 of assessed value for package number 1, which, if I'm re-looking at, it is the addition of 1 police officer, 9 personnel to the fire department, and 1 shared record keeper. Then it looked like package 2 was, if I'm correctly looking at this, is 6 personnel to the fire department, 1 police officer, 1 record person, and 1 shared administrative person. Is that correct? Did I have that correct?
It is.
And then my second.
To a point, because the PFC recommended an additional 3 firefighters a year or 2 down the road.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the first option we're looking at is total of adding 9, 10, 11 staff members to both departments total. And the second option would be adding 6, 7, 8, 9 staff members initially with 3 more. That'd be a total of 12. So what is the cost of package number 2? Because I'm sorry if you said that, I just didn't catch it.
I didn't hit package number 2. I only calculated it out for the 9 firefighters, so it'd obviously be let me do rough math in my head, approximately a third of that. Jennifer's going to come up here. I think she's got it calculated out. I'm sorry.
So option 2 is running at $905,000. So that would be worth $62.83 on a $100,000 value home.
And that's initially, or that's after the second hiring of 3 more?
Then the second hiring, that value is what we initially said, the 1.2 million. So that would go back to the 85 and a half, because it's going to be adding 3. So that's the same cost as if it roughly as option 1 after the second or third year, whenever they add those additional 3.
Except that there's an extra person in that option 2, because they would end up with the same 9 additional staff to the fire department, but the police would end up with the same officer they're asking for, plus a records keeper, plus an admin to be split. So that's an extra person from what I'm trying to do. This is very complicated in this math.
I think, Ms. Spiros, I think in the first option that you read off, I don't know that I heard the full-time record specialist for our department. So I'm not sure if that's the one that you missed, but it should be the same amount of people for both referendums.
Okay, got you. So So that would be 12 extra people also. So we're looking at what, about a total, about a 15% increase in staff members between the two departments?
Well,
Or a total of
at the
15%.
At the police department, the only increase would be the 1/2 admin that's shared.
Right,
That's the
okay.
only increase at the police department.
Because the other, you are just refilling roles that people are going to leave,
Exactly.
retire, what have you.
Right. Those are people that I can't afford to replace this year.
Okay, so you can't afford to replace them. So, I mean, we would be adding them back in semantics, but so I'm looking at the amount. So we have 39 sworn police officers, 36 people in the fire department. So with the addition of 11 or 12 people, it comes out to roughly 15% increase in staff in the two departments. Does that sound right?
Because we're not adding.
Yeah, between the two departments, Jennifer's nodding her head. Yes, that sounds about right. I didn't calculate that out.
Okay. That's all for now.
Alderman Witzel?
Thank you. 15% staff increase, but you're seeing a 36% call increase.
Correct. I mean, from just last year alone, we've experienced roughly 16 to 18% call increase just from 2021. If you go back to 2000, the year 2000, we've gone up over 40% in our call volume.
Just a real quick question about, again, kind of how things would potentially play out. It sounds to me like we're potentially looking at two different options. We're looking at one where we just bite the bullet and do it all at once, and let's just get staffing where it needs to be. Get the police department back to where it was prior to our budget cuts, get the fire department back to where it was before our budget cuts, and add additional 6 officers plus 1 extra record keeper. So net gain, 7 members. If we do the one, it's immediate. If we do the other, it's a slow increase. The concern or the question I guess I have would be how it works logistically. If we were to pass a referendum with a stepped system, we're basically asking the public to approve an increase this year and approve an additional increase the following year. And when I say this year, it's obviously not this year because we're paying our taxes right now, but in this up and coming budget cycle. There's also the expenditure restraint side of this. And I think at this time, at this moment, we're okay if we were to increase because we've done some things with our reserve, yeah. Contingency money, thank you, it's late. We've done some things with contingencies so that we can make, we padded a little bit so we could have that increase without hurting our expenditure restraint. Will that be the same if we did the stepped situation where we would see an increase the first year and then we're going to see a potential increase the second year? We're going to have a problem with that expenditure restraint. Is it better to look at it all at once?
So the basis for the expenditure restraint is what your budget was last year. So if it's sort of like rolling that contingency forward,
okay,
if we don't use it. So, what we have to be careful of is that we don't consume that contingency with recurring things, because then we won't have it to roll forward to absorb these additional expenditures from what may pass in the referendum.
Okay. That answers all my questions. I don't know that I have anything further. Thanks.
Alderman Wagner?
I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to put a motion on the floor to direct the staff to prepare a draft question with options concerning the possibility of going to a referendum and bring that back to the council on the first meeting in January. That'd be my motion. In other words, use the options that they're using here. That's what I'm talking about. Just so that's clear. I think the only reason I'm making that motion is because I just cannot see now how we can get by without doing that. I mean, there's every alderman in this room, anybody who's been here for any length of time knows that sometimes when you go to bed at night and you wonder the way you voted on something and you wonder if that's going to cost somebody's life, a firefighter or a civilian. And I think maybe the only way to get rid of that gnawing feeling is to do the very best we can to try and make this city as safe as we can. So that's my motion, and I'll stay with it. Thank you.
Motion by Alderman Wagner, second by Alderman Handler. Alderman Tompkins?
I just had two quick questions, but maybe this isn't the time. But maybe when you're writing it, is this going to be a rolling referendum? This is not going to be a one-time we hire and then we can't pay them, right? This will be a...
Yes, from what I understand, this is going to be a rolling referendum from year to year with a...
That needs to be in the question somehow.
Yeah, there's a 3%, I believe, or CPI added to that every year.
Okay. And then my second question is if, and this has to do with the 6 or the 9, depending on which one is the question. If those people can't be found, but the taxes are collected for those people, where do we hold that money for when we do hire them? How does that work?
What?
Apparently, that's a really good question.
If we don't.
I'll try to take a stab at that. Yes, I believe that it would be held in reserve, and then you would most likely have to adjust your levy the following year. It's research that we'll need to do on how do we account for the specific levy amount and what happens when you spend under that amount. I guess my guess is that you're allowed to carry some of that unused levy forward into future years. So you would have to reduce and then have a carry forward in your levy.
Alderman Witzel?
Thank you. What is the timing that we're under for getting this onto the April ballot? Maybe that's a question for
You need to adopt a resolution at your January 10th meeting.
So really, we need to have our final draft on the table in front of us, and we have to make a decision at the next meeting.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Motion passes. Item O, staff report. Review agreements from municipalities that contract with private companies for ambulance services, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, at the end of the last council meeting, after closed session, Councilmember O'Reilly asked that a future agenda item include copies of agreements in other municipalities in Wisconsin that have contracts with private ambulance companies as opposed to an in-house operation in their own municipality. So I went out to my peer network across the state, which we do often. People are always sending out requests to find out about ordinances and policies and all sorts of things, all over Wisconsin. I didn't get a lot of response. I got 2 responses I'm going to talk about in a moment. But first, I also went online and looked to find cities of roughly our size, between 15 and 25,000. And I was looking at standalone communities because really, if it's a suburb, some of those have joint agreements with abutting suburbs that, because of their proximity, makes a lot of sense. And that's a different thing altogether. But I found one of the comparables, River Falls, appeared to have a contract with a private company. And of the 2 who responded to me, River Falls was one of them. So I did put on your desk for tonight, and I did email to Councilmember Spiros copies of 2 agreements that are in place right now. One is with the city of River Falls, who contracts with the Line of Health. It's not just for the city of River Falls, it's also Prescott and a few surrounding municipalities, smaller towns, and that kind of thing. And that agreement, I believe, goes for through 5 years. And then the other one is Gold Cross in the eastern part of Wisconsin. I understand that Winnebago and Allegheny counties both have groupings of smaller municipalities that contract with Gold Cross. And I was able to track down one from the city of Wapaka. The city of New London was also involved in that one. And again, some other villages and cities, Wyawega and others. And so that one, I think, is a year to year, basically, until it's called back for maybe a 120-day renegotiation or termination. So I bring this to you not necessarily looking for you to discuss it. Councilmember O'Reilly may want to, but I'm following up on the request to show samples of private EMS contracts across the state.
Alderman O'Reilly?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I requested this. First and foremost, I'm going to pretense this with what tone I've received or heard when other people mention this in the past. And to be completely honest, this has no purpose to dissolve our EMS service, which I've heard often, and it's frustrating. What I wanted to see here personally was how they structure these types of private agreements and basically just dig into, I guess, I'm no expert on this. I'm trying to find out more on all of it. And to be honest with you, I think I can speak for myself and say that I have failed if I did not ask for this information. I think as an elected official, it's my due diligence to reach out and find what our best bang for the buck is. With that being said, I do understand some concerns about going with a private organization, which one of the key ones that I can see would be in the event that you have a breakdown with a private entity, there's just not a whole lot of them that you can bring in to renegotiate with a replacement type organization. I guess I'm hoping everybody can look through this. Ultimately, I would like to dig into it more, and I will be. I guess, like I said before, worst case scenario, we find out that we're getting the best bang for the buck and the best service that we can get. Best case scenario is we find out that somehow we can get it cheaper, better service. I have no idea which way that'll go, but it's my responsibility, in my opinion, to take a look at this and give it an honest look. So I do appreciate you looking through it, Steve. I have had numerous people from the community ask me about this, and I have to do nothing but a shoulder shrug. So I am doing my part to try to figure out where we're at with everything. Like I said, I have no vendetta against our EMS service whatsoever. It's a very expensive portion of our city budget, and it needs to be reviewed and just make sure that we are getting the best bang for the buck. So thank you.
Thank you, Alderman O'Reilly. There's no action taken on that? Yes, Steve?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say you're very welcome, Mike. And if there's any follow-up questions that you have when you look through those agreements, feel free to let me know. I can definitely catch up with the administrators in those communities.
On to item P, suggested items for future agendas. Wow, seeing none. Motion to adjourn? We are adjourned. Thank you. See you next year.